This is a plastic bottle, and this did not exist in socialism. So, how did the communists drink? And what did they do with their bottles? I tell you.
Before the 20th century, human societies reused and recycled widely. Their systems were mostly closed and circular. The United States developed a more open system based on factory production, the brief use of goods, and packaging before sending them to incinerators and landfills. After the Second World War, open systems spread around the globe via Americanization and the American consumer lifestyle. Today, the overall volume of total waste grows continuously in the United States and in the European Union. The Soviets created a different system where objects and waste could mean different ideas than for Westerners. Disposable aluminum cans and plastic bottles were neither produced nor sold in industrial quantities in the Soviet bloc. However, the waste situation in the Soviet bloc was not constant, and more importantly, not without a series of crises. By the 1970s, social, economic, and environmental transformation processes sped up, which in many respects resembled the West but retained a unique character. The root cause of the problem was similar to that in the West. Socialist industries produced a growing number of consumer goods, including a widening share of packaging, such as beverage containers. Recycling in the USSR did not have to entirely follow the same economically profitable principles than in capitalism. Communist recycling was built on ideological foundations instead of the profit motive in the first place and gradually changed during the Cold War to a more economically tuned direction. This rational change might have been influenced by the political reforms of the 1950s and 1960s that made way for the emergence of a new category of socialist consumers. Sugary drinks occupied a symbolic and central societal space in socialism, even in wartime Stalinism. Soviet authorities made the supply of precious raw materials such as sugar and saccharin a priority, which led to significant growth in the production of soft drinks during the darkest Stalinist times. The rapid takeoff in soft drink consumption eventually triggered the modernization of production facilities throughout the socialist bloc. In 1961, the City Council of Budapest recognized the need for modernization in soda production, recommending the establishment of a fully automatic assembly line to increase production and productivity. However, increased production led to supply chain issues and a lack of raw materials in the production process. Quality problems increased with soft drink production, and they were common in the socialist bloc. Domestic beverage production technologies and hygienic systems struggled to keep up with centrally prescribed production growth rates in many Eastern European countries. Before the thaw, Western soft drink brands could not be imported or produced in large quantities due to their association with Western decadence. However, as part of the growing East-West cooperation during the thaw, communist countries gradually gained access to foreign beverages and production capacities. In Hungary, the initial 50 million bottle annual capacity of the first Austria licensed Traube soda plant was doubled in just 3 years by 1973. Traube soda reached incredible popularity in the nation of 10 million by selling over 72 million bottles annually in the early 1980s. Socialist consumers poured down more than just Traube soda in Hungary and were drinking an increasing volume of bottled, non-alcoholic and alcoholic beverages such as beer. As a result of aggressive campaigns to promote soft drinks, sodas began to overcome a large gap between alcoholic beer consumption and soft drink consumption, which increased from 13 liters per capita to 50 liters per capita annually. This substantial growth in soft drink consumption was part of a larger restructuring of the domestic market and consumer practices in the 1960s and 1970s, when the first signs of socialist overconsumption appeared in Hungary. In socialism, the rise in soda production and subsequent glass waste was influenced by alcoholism. Previously, it was believed that alcoholism was denied by Soviet authorities and anti-alcoholism campaigns did not exist until 1985. However, documents from Hungary suggest otherwise. By the late 1950s, about 80,000 Hungarian families were severely affected by alcoholism, which worried communist medical scientists, health professionals, and state authorities. European science linked non-alcoholic beverage promotion to a lower alcohol consumption level in society. In the late 1950s, scientific discourse on the social and economic costs of excessive alcohol consumption grew rapidly in socialist societies. Communist scientists agreed that excessive alcohol consumption was one of socialist society's biggest challenges and was primarily a social, economic, and cultural issue. The National Assembly in Hungary established an anti-alcoholism committee in 1958 to curtail alcoholism through the promotion of non-alcoholic beverages. However, alcoholism prevention efforts failed in the short term, leading to the formation of the National Committee Against Alcoholism to develop an effective anti-alcoholism program. The committee created a comprehensive set of new guidelines by the mid-1960s based on the extensive marketing and production of soft drinks instead of alcoholic beverages. The Council of Ministers integrated the National Committee Against Alcoholism's program into the third five-year plan between 1966 and 1970, emphasizing the development of the soft drink industry via modernizing and improving soda production, production quality, and marketing. In the meantime, the socialist waste stream widened. Budapest faced a serious waste crisis in the mid-1960s after the central dump was closed, leaving the city without a large landfill. The city's waste stream widened further in the 1970s, with illegally dumped waste accounting for thousands of cubic meters annually. This led to concerns among urban planners and scientists who mourned the stagnating efficiency of the country's recycling system and the growing ignorance and carelessness of socialist citizens regarding recycling. In 1968, the Budapest City Planning Company assessed possibilities for waste disposal within the administrative boundaries of the city and found a 23 million cubic meter landfill capacity in former clay and quarry pits. However, the extreme limitations of the waste disposal system became evident. In 1971, the Executive Committee of the Capital City Council discussed waste disposal options, proposing two main alternatives: a new central landfill and a waste incinerator. The incinerator option presented several advantages compared to the landfill possibility, such as speeding up waste elimination close to the source and producing thermal energy for the city. On the other hand, the landfill solution had two major shortcomings: the possibility of polluting local groundwater sources and the lack of available space to dump. The city decided to build a central incinerator with a daily capacity of 1,200 metric tons, managing about 60% of municipal waste. This was seen as putting a permanent band-aid on the waste problem. However, due to structural limitations and frequent boiler failures, the actual capacity of the incinerator was significantly lower than the intended one and required further reconstruction. By 1990, Budapest municipal solid waste had undergone significant growth, and change in terms of composition. The annual volume of waste more than doubled from 2.2 million cubic meters to 4.5 million cubic meters between 1970 and 1990. By the 1980s, cities throughout Eastern Europe faced waste crisis that was similar to the one in Budapest. Despite the similarities of the waste issue on both sides of the Iron Curtain, differences were driven by different political, economic, and social structures, leading to diverging challenges and responses to the post-consumer waste problem. In West Germany, for example, plastic packaging production grew sixfold, while glass packaging only doubled between 1970 and 1990. This resulted in a 4 times larger market for plastic than traditional glass packaging in the Federal Republic by the end of the Cold War. In contrast, the bulk share of glass in the waste stream far surpassed plastic in state socialist countries. Socialist glass containers may be portrayed as a less hazardous waste-making practice than plastics in alu cans in the West. The socialist waste crisis had also a smaller magnitude due to lower consumption levels and a more conservative set of choices of packaging materials. However, the increased volume of waste, particularly of glass beverage containers, suggests that the socialist waste system had its own flaws. Relying solely on glass for beverages and canned food was neither a miracle solution nor effective way to eliminate waste. Glass had several advantages over single-use containers, such as significantly less energy required per unit when recycled well. It is true that the reuse of entire bottles was significantly more effective in terms of energy and materials used, but it also required large human resources and a complex network of recycling. In Hungary, beverage container recycling began to form a separate system in 1961. This received a positive feedback from consumers. However, most recycling points did not work with as much efficiency as the flagship test unit in Inner Budapest. That inefficient recycling grew into a symbol of economic misorganization in socialist Hungary. Socialist satirists at the Ludas Matyi satirical magazine targeted the communist beverage container problem that was now seen as the manifestation of derailed central guidelines. To address issues, local councils increased inspections over the 1960s to discover the misuses of the bottle return system, but resources were inadequate. Trade authorities struggled to increase the frequency of inspections, and managers misusing the system were often left unpunished. Scientists attempted to deliver solutions to the broken bottle return system, such as the establishment of a standalone beverage container recycling network. The government also provided more authority and resources to the secondary raw materials and waste utilizing company. Yet another input came from Hungary's rapidly changing environmentalist discourse. In 1972, the communist government added a resolution from the first United Nations Conference of the Human Environment to the Hungarian Constitution, as Section 57, titled "The Principle of Protecting the Human Environment." Environmental research and development gained political and economic support alongside this shift, with the Hungarian Academy of Sciences that launched the Protecting the Human Environment research program in 1977. This targeted municipal waste and recycling systems as well. Despite positive changes, Hungary's recycling faced a deepening crisis due to the regime's focus on satisfying consumer needs. By the 1980s, over a quarter of consumer complaints related to the recycling practices in supermarkets and grocery stores. Journalists investigated the discrepancies in the bottle recycling mechanism of Hungary, finding out that most consumers didn't know the exact technicalities for returning glass bottles to collect deposit fees. Despite the grave issues of recycling in Hungary, about 50% of the 100 million glass containers that were produced in 1980 were recycled via grocery stores. Hungarians recycled glass in the 1980s at an 11-20 times higher rate than US consumers today. After 3.5 decades, the collapse of communism and nearly 2 decades of European Union membership, the Hungarian recycling rate has dropped to approximately to the same level as in the United States. In the 1980s, sorting was discussed as a new opportunity to increase recycling rates, and the City Council of Budapest approved plans to install post-consumer waste sorting equipment in multi-story buildings, particularly in large housing blocks. The council opened a public competition for designing this complex system, requiring consumers to pre-separate secondary raw materials like paper and cardboard for recycling. However, implementation of the sorting system was slow and failed to take off. Simultaneously, sorting waste campaigns continued throughout the 1980s, focusing on paper, metal, plastic, rags, and glass. The Council of Budapest aimed to increase public engagement via propaganda, with a special focus on school-aged children and young adults, and to increase the comfort of sorting solutions for citizens. Conclusively, the socialist waste dilemma was unique to Eastern European economies because of their social, ideological, and cultural aspects. Despite different ideological foundations, the socialists battled with similar waste problems than in the West. However, systematic differences were large enough to produce less post-consumer waste and to recycle that waste more efficiently compared to the West.